So, sunrise ceremony on Alcatraz was a beautiful, beautiful occurrence. I got here on the third boat, but I wanted to say that this time it was amazing. I was questioning coming. I was questioning being a part of this. I wanted to do something on land, but something kept calling me. I'm in my regalia, holding it down. Ohlone territory. Cousin Dee Dee was there. And guess who was on the island? We had Colin Kaepernick in the house. He didn't want to talk. He didn't want to take any of the spotlight. But Fred Short wanted to offer him with his feathers. So that was a beautiful occurrence. And of course all the natives went to get pictures. And so it was a beautiful day today. We had a chance to have that veterans dance, the veterans of the occupation and the families. And they danced around the circle, and it was beautiful. I might be posting that up on my YouTube channel. And the roaming Ohlone was hanging out with me today. And I just wanted to say a big oh to the organizers and a big oh to our Cali natives who were present, because we need to represent. We need to acknowledge that indigenous protocol. We got San Francisco over there, Yalamu, Ramaytush Ohlone territory. We have Huchin, Oakland, Berkeley territories. We need to acknowledge these First Nation peoples. We need to acknowledge original peoples. I'm a Southern Ohlone native, and I'm blessed to be able to go up there because cousins couldn't be here. But I hold that space with them. I hold that space for them and with them to hold that respect and solidarity. So for those of you who couldn't make it, we're right on Alcatraz Island. And did you know, had the occupation not happened, that the national parks wouldn't even have jobs? I didn't even know that. So when it comes to indigenous peoples holding and standing in solidarity, honoring truth and history, we need to be sure that that original narrative is brought to the surface, that original narrative is honored in our own voices. The same thing, I was hanging out with Nanette Dietz, and I was hanging out with another member who was right there in Berkeley when it came for Berkeley to acknowledge Indigenous Peoples Day, what is known as Columbus Day in October, that it was talking about the 500 years of resistance from that first act of colonization, of discovery. And when it comes to the documentation, everywhere it says 1993. That's incorrect. I'm just looking for the papers right now to show when they started that process. Everyone started to gather together in the 80s. And at least 90, 91, 92 is when Berkeley fully acknowledged that Columbus Day will, for that point on, be acknowledged as Indigenous Peoples Day. Berkeley was ahead of the game, and it was due to the resilience and resistance of indigenous peoples and people standing in solidarity to honor truth and history. So that's kind of messed up that every freaking reference when I went online says 1993. It's because some news outlet acknowledged it. Now, that's very, very frustrating, right? When you're trying to honor truth and history and trying to make legitimate reference and we're relying on these media sources, think about it. We need to be in charge of our own narrative. How do people, indigenous peoples, want to be represented and acknowledged? The same thing when it comes to rude people, bumping into stuff. When it comes to indigenous peoples, like let's say of this Bay Area, the Spaniards call us costaños, Costanoan. Yes, that might be in the documentation, and yes, I sometimes identify as that. I say Costanoan, Ohlone, Mutsun woman. But we need to correct that narrative so we may be honored in a good way and with our first words. That's why when I was up on the microphone and I opened the space up, I first acknowledged that San Francisco is known as Yalamu, the Ramaytush Ohlone territory. Ramaytush language was spoken before Spanish, before English. And then over in the Bay, East Bay, Chichenyo and Carquin, that one of the village sites over there is known as Huchin. There's a few others that, hey, you do a little research, you get a little bit more knowledge that you yourself are in charge of your own education, that you can find that information out. It's not up to the local natives to educate you. It's not up to everybody else to inform you and expect you to hold you to a standard. It's up to you. So I'm here live on Alcatraz. This is Indian land. And as I said, had it not been for the occupation, national parks wouldn't have this touristic place. And I want to say, I almost started crying when I was talking to Eloy, because two things happened. I'm going to interview him, and let's see, let me get a good shot. Oh, we're on Indian land. So I was talking to Eloy, and he was talking to me and explaining to me, I need to ask him for the solid statement, because this is going to be me attempting to paraphrase. One, he met some of the officers, or one of the officers who was one of the original officers on the land, and when it was a penitentiary. And the Officers Club get to have annual retreats and acknowledge that they were once working here when this was a penitentiary. And one of those officers was so filled with anger and hate that he told Eloy he no longer had that job. He went forward. He purposefully got the right to be a marshal, and he had Eloy in his scopes. Didn't even know why. He's just like, you Indians were occupying it, and I had you in my sights. I was going to take you out if they gave me the order. Had so much hate. Didn't even know why. Well, he knew why at that time. And maybe I might get a chance to talk to him, find out why. I'm going to talk to Eloy to document his narrative and his firsthand experience. But another experience that in a conversation that I was having with Eloy Martinez, one of the first occupiers, he was saying that he was here on the island, and he now has a locker, and he's a perma volunteer, so to speak, to acknowledge truth and history. And 7 years ago, there was a serial criminal who was, a prisoner here. And 7 years ago, he got out of jail because he kept writing bad checks. So he came to the island, and he's like, this was my cell. I was over here. So the parks and the bookstore encouraged him to write a book, and he gets to come here. Ha! Connection! Yeah, right? Bridging the digital divide. So, let me get back to that. Eloy was talking to that criminal, and that criminal said crime pays. Why did he say that? Well, the bookstore talked to him, talked to the criminal. He got a book deal. He signed a book. And he gets a visit, often. In the past 7 years, he's turned into a millionaire. He actually has a white car, a red car, and a blue car. And he pulled Eloy off to the side, because Eloy gets to park right over on shore. And he goes, I told you, Eloy, crime pays. A millionaire for a serial criminal. And when you think about it, when it comes to the occupation of Alcatraz, one, national parks would not have a job. Two, it implemented so much change around the Bay and around the world when it came to policy change with Nixon, when it came to I'm still learning these things, and we need to honor truth and history, because Indigenous perspectives, Indigenous values need to be honored. So I got the Bay in my background, hair's all messed up, honoring Ohlone territory, Ramaytush Ohlone territory, as well as Huichin and the East Bay. And so I just want to give a shout out that we need to come together. We need to honor truth and history. So Indians of All Tribes was a small organization that Lynetta and some of the first organizers put together. I've been helping them and acknowledging their work and honoring truth and history. And I myself, as an Ohlone, a Mutsun Ohlone woman and a connector and a coyote and an individual who is focused on honoring truth and history, I want to say that we need to bridge our communities. We need to let go of the pain of the past. We need to move forward, and we need to be in charge of our own narrative. So I'm putting this out there right now. For those of you who want to help, for those of you who want to honor original peoples, help me connect. Help me connect, because I'm going to be reaching out to the indigenous peoples of the watershed of the Bay Area, because I am a Southern Ohlone. My home is Indian Canyon. Indian Canyon is the only federally recognized Indian country here in the Bay Area, from Rohnert Park down to Santa Barbara. That being said, Anne Marie Sayers has opened up that family trust allotment for all indigenous people in need of land for ceremony. And so I was raised around ceremony. I was raised with intertribal communities. I was raised acknowledging that intertribal protocol and that indigenous protocol of when people came to the land, they brought offerings to my mother and sought out permission to be there. And so we need to teach this to other people. We need to teach other people. Okay, I got this. We need to teach people how to respect that indigenous protocol. We need to remind people how to respect and honor the ancestors of whose land we are on. Right now, I'm on an island, and I know this island has significance within the Bay. I'm still learning that significance, and I'm still learning good ways that we may honor and respect the original peoples of this Bay. We've traveled together, and I've been learning from so many relations and so many cousins. And I was so honored just the other night that a relative from... I am going to fail because my brain has so many names twisting in my head. If you're familiar with the canoe journey, I was gifted with olivella shells, a little unique to their territory, but very similar to ours. And see, ours are up here, and theirs are right here. Gifted in a good way, and to acknowledge that protocol. And I wish my cousins were there to accept it too, but I was there. And my voice was strong, and I try to do my best to honor original peoples. And so what I'm trying to pitch, I am trying to pitch, because now y'all are listening, and I want you to share, please, pretty please, share. When it comes to sharing and honoring truth and history, I want to ask those of you, have you ever been to Alcatraz? And if you have, somewhere over there are those really annoying, okay, they're not annoying, they're informative. There are the informative brochures that show the island and the tiny little history of the penitentiary. Native peoples were here before the penitentiary had its history, and then the occupation happened, and then the occupation had its influence around. Now, the biggest money-making tourist thing is the penitentiary. But imagine if you came here in a year, or 2 years. 2019 is the 50th anniversary of the occupation of Alcatraz, and I invite you to help me make it amazing. I'm working with so many amazing people and organizations, and we are trying to honor truth and history and acknowledge that when we gather in prayer, when we gather as a community, when we gather no longer holding differences between each other, that we can make change. And so there's a need. And so imagine, if you will, you came to Alcatraz and you saw those brochures by the bookstore, and there was a brochure right next to the island, the tour, the little map showing all these spaces, and you saw one that said the occupation of Alcatraz. You would want to check it out, right? And you would want to know how much change, how much influence the occupation had, because some people are doing the whole, like, why is it important? The occupation happened back in 1969. Well, it had a deep influence. And when we think about Standing Rock, you know, that hashtag Standing Rock is everywhere, we stand with Standing Rock. Well, Alcatraz was the first Standing Rock. So when it comes to acknowledging that truth and history, imagine opening that brochure. And before you get to hear about the occupation of Alcatraz, you get to acknowledge space and place. Because within Indigenous communities, as well as us strengthening bridges with our allies and our accomplices, those who get that nice little peek and respectful protocols on how they know how to acknowledge space and place, we need to teach the outside community how to respect and acknowledge space and place, especially the original ancestors, the original narratives, the original peoples, the original languages of the space that we occupy in today's post-colonial occupied territories, what is known as Turtle Island. And so I ask you and I let you know, imagine, if you will, you open a brochure that says about the occupation, and there is a collective bit of information of that kind of almost forceful but respectful Indigenous protocol of acknowledging space and place. And that is why I'm seeking out an opportunity to reach out to the natives of this watershed from south of San Rafael, Ramaytush Ohlone territory, and Huchin, Karkin, and this watershed. When our ancestors traded, our ancestors came together, how do we as California natives want to be represented? What can we share with the non-native community to honor truth and history? And how, as Indigenous peoples, we need our narrative to be shared in the best way possible, instead of looking at history books and coming to some conclusion about how the Native people once used to be. So I ask you, help me connect, help offering your skills. If we know any writers, grant writers, to help dancers, to help singers, to help elders come from the North Bay, come from the South Bay, so we can indigenize the Bay, so we can have a bunch of Cali natives representing on the island. Because yes, Indians of all tribes, they held it down because there was a need. And some California natives were present on the island. I believe some were Pomo and some other relatives. And then non-native community were standing in solidarity to honor truth and history. We need to bridge our communities, and we need to strengthen means of educating allies, to helping other people understand how to respectfully engage and interact with California natives and around California native issues. So I ask you that help me connect. And I know sometimes I slip on what I'm talking about, and I know I'm still learning, and I'm still attempting to walk in a good way. And yeah, it looks like I'm crazy coyote sucking up all the limelight, but you know what? I'm trying to do what I can, when I can, where I can, with whatever I can. And so if I could push myself into circles, if I push myself into these areas to try and encourage that raising awareness of acknowledging Indigenous protocol, I will. I know I end up accidentally stepping on toes. I know I end up like getting in there, and I apologize for those who I've hurt and offended. I apologize to the times I've misspoke, and I just want to bring our communities together. We need to release some of the pain and anguish and frustration and resentment that we carry with this colonial lateral trauma, or colonial trauma and lateral oppression, right? We are in a post-colonial society, and so many people are entitled and privileged, and that has kind of intoxicated even our own communities, and we need to let it go. We need to let it go and walk forward in a good way. And if that means wellness workshops, if that means allyship and accomplice teach-ins, teaching the teachers, how do we educate people in a good way? And so I really want to bridge our communities, natives and non-natives, and Indigenous peoples of all the world, because Indigenous communities were everywhere. We had Indigenous communities in Europe. We had Indigenous communities right there, Australia, New Zealand, Maori. I mean, that Indigenous value and perspective is respected. Being stewards of the land and being multilingual, being peoples of the earth, we hold that regard a little stronger than today's colonial mentality. And we need to use the skills of what colonial entitlement and mentality has brought into our world, such as technologies and, resources and such like that, but tap into it and re-indigenize it. So I know I'm rambling. It's my effort in trying to raise awareness that sunrise ceremony happened on what I call Turkey Day. And it's not quite Unthanksgiving. It's no thanks, no giving. Every day we should be grateful for being thankful. Being thankful that we are alive today. Every single day. And there are times of harvest. And there are times. But think about it. Go do your history. Go do your research when acknowledging truth and history, that you can learn about the true history of what is known in today's society as Columbus Day and Turkey Day, Thanksgiving. That you might learn a little bit more than what has been rehashed and delivered to you in today's colonial settler delivering whitewashed history. So I ask you to take charge of your own education, Acknowledge the spaces and places that you occupy. Where is it that you live? Who were the first peoples? What were the first languages? Do you have sacred mountains? Do you have sacred waters? And do the first peoples want or need people to pray at those spaces? Sometimes they don't. Sometimes it is best to respect those spaces. Get what I'm saying? To find out, so you may honor or respect the indigenous peoples in the way that they as a community may bring voice to. So that's one little step in decolonization. So I ask you to share, and I hope those of you who caught the news, Colin Kaepernick got honored by Fred Short, by the feathers he was dancing with for many years. A beautiful sight to see, that we stand in solidarity and come together as a community. So, and we take the rock, honor truth and history, hashtag Indigenizethebay, and check out all of the fun, amazing things. Coyote Woman Creations page is more of my serious page, because I know I post a lot. And so, thank you everyone. For those who are here, can you share, send some love, share in some groups, because we need to indigenize the bay. And what better way to do it in a good way as acknowledging the indigenous peoples of the watershed, and how do we take back the rock in the best way possible and stand in solidarity with this movement that needs to happen. So lots of love, Canyon Coyote Woman. On the rock, reporting to you live. What's up? All right.